He spent over 7 decades dancing through Hollywood's golden age, smiling on screen, charming generations, hiding every storm behind grace. But today, at 99, Dick Van Dyke is not hiding anymore. "I saw it all," he says, eyes calm but heavy. "The lies, the egos, the disrespect. I stayed quiet because that was the game, but not now." With a voice firm yet wounded, he begins to name names not out of revenge, but release. Behind the cameras and laughter were moments that broke him, and now he finally ready to talk. These are the 6 actors he never worked with again. Before we dive into video, please subscribe our channel. Number 1. Chevy Chase. Dick Van Dyke had worked with comedians all his life, legends like Mary Tyler Moore, Carol Burnett, and even Robin Williams. But when it came to Chevy Chase, something felt different from the start. It was not just the sarcasm, it was the sharpness behind every word, the cold air that followed him into every room. He was funny on camera, Dick admitted, but off camera it was a different kind of show, one I never wanted a ticket to. It all started on the set of a light-hearted comedy special in the late 80s. The network wanted to mix classic and modern comedy, so they paired Dick with Chevy. At first, the idea sounded exciting. Dick had admired Chase's work on Saturday Night Live and believed they could create something magical together. But by the second day of rehearsal, the cracks began to show. Chevy would show up late, barely greet the crew, and immediately begin mocking the script. When Dick tried offering a suggestion, Chevy laughed not with him, but at him. "He looked at me like I was a relic," Dick said, "like I belonged in a museum, not a studio." During one rehearsal, Chevy made a joke on stage that left everyone silent. He mocked Dick age directly, imitating him with a slow walk and slurred speech. People chuckled nervous. Owsley, but Dick stood there frozen. It was not funny, it was cruel, he remembered. And the worst part? He loved that moment. You could see it in his eyes. The final taping went on, but the energy was broken. The laughter felt forced, the chemistry was gone. After the show, Chevy never said goodbye, he just vanished. Dick walked away that night feeling something he rarely felt in his long career, humiliated. "I have worked with all kinds of people," he said years later. "Big egos, wild talents, even troubled souls. But Chevy, he was different. There was no warmth, just a need to be the sharpest guy in the room, even if it cut others to pieces." And for Dick Van Dyke, who built his legacy on kindness and joy, that was a deal breaker. Number 2. Shia LaBeouf. Dick Van Dyke always believed in giving young actors a chance. He had mentored many rising stars and saw it as his responsibility to guide the next generation. So when a producer suggested a cameo role alongside Shia LaBeouf in a late 2000s project, Dick agreed without hesitation. He had seen Shia's early work. Smart, emotional, and full of raw energy. There was brilliance in his eyes, Dick said. But there was also something else, something troubled. The trouble started the moment they met. Shia arrived 2 hours late to the first rehearsal, sunglasses on indoors, barely acknowledging anyone. He mumbled through introductions and disappeared between takes. Dick, always polite, tried to break the ice with light conversation. "He stared right through me," he recalled, "like I was not even there." Things got worse during filming. Shia refused to stick to the script, changing lines and ignoring cues. One day while shooting a simple dialogue scene, he suddenly shouted a line that was not in the script loud and angry. The crew stopped in shock. The director looked confused. Dick just stood there, shaken. "It felt like, I was in a different movie," he said, "one that I never signed up for." Even more troubling was Shia's behavior off camera. He was often seen pacing around alone, talking to himself, or blasting music through headphones. He never joined the cast or crew for meals. Once, he stormed out in the middle of a scene claiming the energy on set was too fake. No one knew what to do. The project started falling apart. Dick finally walked into the producer's office and said, "I have worked with troubled actors. I have helped them, but this is not helpable. This is chaos." The producer tried to calm him, but Dick was firm. He finished his scenes and left the project early. Years later, Dick still remembers the pain in Shia's eyes, but also the danger. He was not a bad person, Dick admitted, but he was drowning and pulling others down with him. For a man like Dick Van Dyke, who built his life around harmony and joy, working with Shia was like walking through a storm without shelter. Once was enough. Number 3. Lindsay Lohan. Dick Van Dyke had always believed in second chances. In fact, he had lived one himself. But when he crossed paths with Lindsay Lohan during a charity TV special in the early 2000s, what he saw was not just a young actress spiraling, it was a reflection of everything he feared about modern fame. "She had the spark," Dick said. "She reminded me of Judy Garland. Talented, magnetic, but with eyes that looked tired, worn out before their time. The project was simple, a feel-good musical number bringing together stars from different generations. Dick had been excited. He thought it would be fun to dance with someone from a younger era, someone the kids adored. Lindsay was at the peak of her fame then, and also at the peak of her personal chaos. On the first day, she showed up 2 hours late, eyes puffy, voice hoarse. Her assistant did all the talking. Dick tried greeting her warmly, but she barely responded. It was like she was there, but not really, he recalled. Rehearsals were rocky. Lindsay forgot lines, missed steps, and often vanished during breaks. One moment, she would be laughing and charming. The next, she'd be curled up in a chair, silent and closed off. Dick tried to gently offer advice, but she brushed it off. "I have got it," she snapped once. "I know what I'm doing." But she did not, and Dick knew it. One evening, during a final dress rehearsal, Lindsay broke down crying in the middle of a scene. Cameras stopped, crew waited, no one said a word. Dick walked over and sat beside her, not saying anything, just placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I wanted to help," he said later, "but I was not her answer. She needed something bigger, something I could not give." The show aired, but the magic was missing. What should have been a joyful moment felt heavy, incomplete, and for Dick, it became a memory he wished he could erase. "I did not blacklist her out of hate," he said. "I just could not go through that again. Watching someone fall, knowing you cannot catch them, it breaks your heart." And Dick's heart, after all these years, still hurt for her. Number 4. Christian Bale. Dick Van Dyke has shared the screen with actors from every generation, from the easygoing charmers of the 50s to the method-driven stars of today. He admired commitment, respected discipline, and loved when actors truly became their roles. But with Christian Bale, the line between performance and punishment was far too thin. "It was like watching fire," Dick said. "Incredible to see, but you never felt safe standing near it." Their paths crossed during a private industry workshop, a small, invite-only project exploring old film scenes in modern styles. Van Dyke was one of the guests of honor, while Bale had agreed to do a short dramatic piece opposite him. The pairing raised eyebrows, but producers were excited. They thought it would be electric. It was, just not on the way they hoped. From the moment Bale entered the room, the temperature shifted. He refused small talk, demanded quiet on set, and stayed in character long before anyone said action. He was intense, locked in, laser-focused, and impossible to approach. "I tried saying hello," Dick recalled, "but he looked right through me, as if I was not there." During rehearsal, things turned worse. Bale snapped at a lighting technician for moving during a take. Later, he shouted at a makeup artist for interrupting his process. Dick stood silently, uncomfortable. "I have seen passion," he said. But this wasn't passion, this was fury. Their scene together was short, a father-son moment. But Bale played it with such harshness and anger that Dick flinched on camera. It was not in the script, it was not rehearsed, and it felt deeply personal. When the take ended, no one clapped. The room was frozen. Bale walked off without a word. Later, Dick pulled the director aside and quietly said, "He is brilliant, but brilliance should not scare people." He left the project the next day. Years later, Dick still respects Bale's talent. "He's one of the best," he admitted. But working with him felt like walking on broken glass. You never knew what would cut next. For a man who built his life on joy, music, and warmth, the darkness that Bale carried was simply too much. Once was more than enough. Number 5. Katherine Hygel. Dick Van Dyke had seen many faces in Hollywood, some kind, some cold, and some carefully crafted to please the camera. But when he met Katherine Hygel during a charity telethon event in the late 2000s, something about her smile felt hollow. There was beauty, talent, even charm, he said. But behind the charm was a wall, and no one was allowed in. The event brought together actors from all generations. Van Dyke had been invited as a special guest, while Katherine was set to co-host a segment. The producers were excited to see them share the stage, two stars from two different eras. But the chemistry was off from the very beginning. She arrived looking perfect, Dick recalled, but she did not speak to anyone. Not the crew, not the volunteers, not even her fellow hosts. Everything went through her manager. Every line she delivered was rehearsed and robotic. Every smile felt painted on. During rehearsals, Dick tried to strike up a friendly conversation, hoping to break the ice. He complimented her timing, asked about her upcoming roles, even cracked a few light jokes. but she barely responded. "She gave me this look," he said, "like I was wasting her time." The breaking point came during a live segment. One of the child performers missed their cue, and the moment turned awkward. Dick, ever the professional, tried to improvise and keep the mood light. Katherine, instead of helping, rolled her eyes, on camera. Then, backstage, she snapped at the director and blamed the script, the staff, even the audience. "She treated people like furniture," Dick said, disappointed. "Just part of the set." After the show, she left immediately, skipping the thank you dinner and leaving behind a room full of people who felt used. "I have worked with perfectionists," Dick explained. "That's not the issue. But when kindness disappears, when you treat people like they are beneath you, that's where I draw the line." Years later, when asked about working with Hygel again, Dick's answer was gentle but clear. No, not because she was difficult, but because there was no warmth, no joy. And without joy, what are we even doing here? For Dick, joy was the soul of showbiz, and with Katherine, it was nowhere to be found. Number 6. James Franco. Dick Van Dyke had worked with actors of all kinds, dreamers, rebels, geniuses, and misfits. But when he met James Franco, it was not the wildness that bothered him. It was the arrogance hiding behind that casual, crooked smile. He walked in like he owned the room, Dick said, but forgot the room was built by people before him. Their meeting happened at a Hollywood gala honoring classic television stars. Dick was there to present an award. Franco was one of the night's celebrity guests, invited to celebrate the past while representing the future. The event was elegant, respectful, until Franco grabbed the mic during a backstage interview. He started mocking everything, Dick recalled. The old shows, the old styles, even the old actors. What was meant to be lighthearted came across as mocking. He did impressions of outdated sitcoms, called them cringe comedy, and even joked that actors from the 60s wouldn't survive a day on a modern set. Dick smiled politely in public, but inside, he was stunned. "There's a way to be funny," he said, "and then there's just being mean." The final straw came later that evening. At a private table surrounded by producers, Franco bragged loudly about improvising full scenes in major films, ignoring directors, rewriting lines, and mocking boomer actors for being too slow. He called it creative freedom. Dick called it disrespect. "I don't mind confidence," Dick said, "but when confidence turns into cruelty, it's not art, it's ego." They never worked together, but Dick was once offered a cameo in a film where Franco had the lead role. He turned it down without hesitation. "If I share the screen with someone," he explained, "they need to respect the crew, the story, and the people who pave the road they are walking on." Franco's career would later face its own dark chapters, but Dick's opinion was shaped long before that. It was not based on headlines, it was based on energy, on how someone treats others when no one is watching. "For me," Dick said, "it's not about talent, it's about soul." And in Franco's presence, he felt no soul. Only noise, only self-praise, only a smile that hid something colder. And that, for Dick Van Dyke, was enough. After a lifetime in Hollywood, Dick Van Dyke has earned the right to speak his truth. His stories are not about revenge, they are about reflection. Behind every smile was a lesson, behind every name a memory that left a mark. He worked with legends, lifted spirits, and brought joy to millions. But even in a world of lights and fame, not everyone shines the same. These 6 actors, in their own ways, crossed a line he could not ignore. And now, with honesty and grace, he closes that chapter not in anger, but with peace and wisdom.